Steven Universe might seem like a lighthearted show about love and friendship, but underneath the songs and jokes, it's full of heartbreak. Every character has a moment where everything falls apart, and those scenes hit way harder than you'd expect. It's the kind of show where emotions are the story. When these characters break down, it feels real, personal, honest, and those moments can leave a bigger impact than any battle ever could. So, in this video, we're breaking down every Steven Universe's character's saddest moment, and why it still hurts. But before we start the video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Steven. Okay, let's talk about Steven Universe for a second. People love to hate on this show, but honestly, it gets trauma better than most adults show do. So, in I Am My Monster, Steven literally transforms into a giant pink kaiju monster. And before you roll your eyes thinking this is some weird cartoon nonsense, hear me out. This episode is actually genius. Here's what led up to this mess. Throughout Steven Universe future, Steven's been falling apart. The war's over, everyone's happy, but Steven, he's got serious PTSD that nobody's addressing. He's been to therapists for literally everyone, but when Steven needs help, crickets. The kid's been having panic attacks, violent outbursts, and his powers are going haywire. Instead of getting therapy like a normal person, he just keeps pretending he's fine. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's most of us. What really pushed Steven over the edge was realizing he might actually hurt someone. His gem powers became unstable. He almost shattered Jasper, and he's been lashing out at people who care about him. Instead of reaching out for help, he isolates himself and starts believing the worst about himself. Classic self-destructive behavior that hits way too close to home. So, Steven finally snaps and turns into this massive monster that's basically his self-hatred made physical. He genuinely believes he's a dangerous freak who ruins everything he touches. The same kid who spent years saving everyone now thinks he's too toxic to be around people. Here's what got me. When the diamonds show up to help, their magic doesn't work. Yellow can't fix his body, blue can't calm his emotions, white can't even read his mind. That's because you can't magic away mental health problem. Revolutionary concept for a kid's show, right? The episode gets really dark when Steven starts attacking his own friends and family. The cluster, literally a fusion of shattered gems, has to hold him back. Think about that symbolism for a second. Steven's so broken that other broken things are trying to protect people from him. The whole thing becomes this giant group therapy session where everyone has to chase Steven down just to hug him. Garnet literally grows giant size to give him a proper embrace. It's ridiculous and beautiful at the same time. But Connie's the one who really gets it. She basically calls everyone out, saying we all had Steven when we needed him, but Steven never had Steven. Like, damn, his 16-year-old just diagnosed the entire problem in one sentence. She also shuts down the diamonds when they start making Steven's breakdown about their own guilt. The group hug scene is actually brilliant because it shows how healing works in real life. Everyone shares their own struggles. Garnet talks about falling apart, Pearl mentions keeping secrets, Amethyst discusses self-hatred. They're basically telling Steven, we've been there too, and we got through it. The crying scene at the end absolutely destroyed me. Steven's tears are literally glowing as he transforms back, and you realize this kid has been carrying everyone's problems for years without anyone checking if he's okay. Look, people can trash Steven Universe all they want, but this episode shows depression and trauma more accurately than most prestige dramas. Steven's monster form is just what it feels like when your brain convinces you that you're poison to everyone around you. The show doesn't give easy answers either. Steven's recovery isn't instant. It takes work, therapy, and accepting that it's okay to not be the strong one all the time. Pretty heavy stuff for a kid's show, but honestly, kids deal with this stuff too. At least Steven Universe doesn't pretend mental health problems disappear with a hug and a song. Steven became a monster because no one listened, but Garnet fell apart because she realized she'd been listening to the wrong person all along. Garnet. Alright, let's talk about the moment that absolutely destroyed Garnet fans everywhere. Steven Universe gets really dark sometimes, and this episode proves it. In Now We're Only Falling Apart, Garnet learns the truth that changes everything. Rose Quartz, the leader she followed, the rebel she believed in, the person who inspired her entire existence, was actually Pink Diamond. A literal diamond. The enemy they'd been fighting against for thousands of years. This reveal hits Garnet like a truck. She starts shaking, struggling to stay fused, and then completely falls apart. Not metaphorically, literally. Ruby and Sapphire unfuse for the first time in ages, and you can see the exact moment Garnet's world collapses. Sapphire absolutely loses it. She's furious, heartbroken, and feels completely betrayed. She screams at Ruby about how her entire relationship was built on lies. How Rose made fools of them all. The woman who told them to never question who they are as Garnet was lying to their faces the whole time. Then Sapphire does the most devastating thing possible. She leaves. She warps away while Ruby begs her to stay and talk it out. Ruby drops to her knees crying, and Garnet just doesn't exist anymore. Here's what makes this so brutal. Garnet's entire identity is built on love and trust. She's the fusion of two gems who chose to be together. Her whole thing is being stable, being the rock everyone depends on. But when that foundation crumbles, she has nothing left to stand on. People always focus on the dramatic stuff, the battles, the corruption, the shattering, but this is way more devastating because it attacks Garnet's core beliefs. She thought that she was fighting against the good fight against a fellow rebel. Turns out she was following one of the diamonds the whole time. Sapphire's breakdown is especially painful because she's supposed to see the future. Her whole power is knowing what's coming next, but she completely missed this massive deception that was right in front of her for thousands of years. She feels stupid, used, and blind. The worst part is how personal this betrayal feels. Rose didn't just lie about her identity. She held their hands, looked them in the eyes, and told them to embrace being Garnet while hiding this massive secret. Every moment of validation and support was tainted by deception. The episode shows how trauma doesn't always come from violence. Sometimes, the worst pain comes from learning that your entire reality was a lie. Garnet doesn't get physically hurt, she gets emotionally shattered, which is somehow worse. The scene where Ruby is left alone, crying on the floor while Sapphire's gone, hits different than any fight scene in the show. Ruby's just sitting there, confused and heartbroken, not understanding why their relationship has to fall apart because of someone else's lies. What makes this Garnet's saddest moment is that she loses herself completely. Other characters get hurt, corrupted, or separated from loved ones. But Garnet ceases to exist entirely because the truth makes it impossible for Garnet and Sapphire to stay together. The show doesn't sugarcoat how devastating this kind of betrayal can be. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. When someone you followed for millennia turns out to be living a complete lie, how do you even begin to process that? Garnet always represented stability and unwavering love. Seeing her completely fall apart because of someone else's deception is heartbreaking in a way that physical violence never could be. Some wounds cut deeper than any weapon. But learning your entire life was built on lies is one of them. Garnet shattered because the truth rewrote her entire identity. But Amethyst was already broken by a world that told her she never should have existed in the first place. Amethyst. Amethyst's most devastating episode comes in on the run. A moment where Steven Universe dives deep into trauma and doesn't hold back. This episode starts innocent enough. Steven and Amethyst decide to run away and be no-home boys. After hearing about the homeworld threat, they're having fun, singing songs, hopping trains like some cartoon adventure. But then Amethyst takes Steven somewhere that changes everything. She brings him to the kindergarten, the place where she was made, and suddenly the whole tone shifts from playful to heartbreaking. Here's where things get brutal. Amethyst shows Steven her literal birth hole in the wall, talking about it like it's no big deal, but you can see she's hurting underneath. When Pearl shows up and she gets upset about them being there, everything explodes. Amethyst completely loses it and screams the most devastating line in the show. So the Earth would be safe from parasites like me. And she starts breaking down crying and says, I never asked for it to be this way. I never asked to be made. This moment destroys you because Amethyst genuinely sees herself as a mistake. She calls herself a parasite, something harmful that shouldn't exist. She was created by the same system that tried to destroy Earth, and she's internalized that guilt completely. The fight between her and the Pearl is brutal, but what makes it worse is Amethyst's motivation. She's not just angry, she's attacking Pearl because she thinks Pearl sees her as an embarrassment. She screams, I'm not gonna let you stand there and remind me of everything I hate about myself. That line hits so hard because it's pure self-loathing. Amethyst doesn't just dislike herself. She actively hates who she is. She sees Pearl's disappointment and thinks it confirms everything she believes about being worthless. When she hides in her hole crying, go away, I'm bad and you shouldn't be around me. It's devastating. This is genuine trauma from someone who believes their existence is fundamentally wrong. What makes this episode even more heartbreaking is the context. Amethyst has been the comic relief for so long, always cracking jokes and acting carefree. Seeing her, of all people, completely fall apart reveals how much pain she's been hiding behind that cheerful mask. The episode also shows how toxic shame works. Amethyst doesn't just feel bad about something she did. She feels bad about existing at all. That's a level of self-hatred that goes way beyond normal insecurity. What makes this Amethyst's saddest moment is how personal it gets. She's carrying guilt for something she had no control over, being created by Homeworld. The kindergarten represents everything toxic about her self-image. It's this dead, barren place where gems were made to drain Earth's life force. Amethyst was born there, so she thinks she's inherently destructive too. Pearl tries to fix it by saying Amethyst is the one good thing that came out of this mess, but that's almost worse. Being called the exception just reinforces that everything else about her origin is shameful. This episode shows how trauma works in real life. Amethyst doesn't rationally blame herself. She emotionally believes she's fundamentally flawed. She's internalized the idea that she's a mistake, and no amount of logic can fix that kind of deep-seated self-hatred. The worst part is seeing how long she's been carrying this pain alone. She's been the funny, carefree gem who makes jokes and eats garbage, but underneath she's been hating herself this whole time. Steven Universe doesn't sugarcoat mental health struggles, and Amethyst's breakdown in On the Run is proof. Sometimes the cruelest voice telling you that you're worthless is your own, and that's exactly what Amethyst is dealing with here. The show makes it clear that healing from this kind of trauma takes time, support, and learning to see yourself as worthy of love despite your origins. Amethyst was crushed by the belief that she was a mistake from the moment she was made, but Pearl was broken by a love that disguised obedience as choice and left her silenced for thousands of years. But before we continue the video, make sure to subscribe. And now, let's get back to the video. Pearl's most devastating moment might be the cruelest thing Steven Universe ever did to any character, revealing just how deep her pain and silence truly go. A single pale rose starts simple enough. Steven's trying to help Pearl find her lost phone, but as he goes deeper into Pearl's gem, he discovers something that completely breaks your heart. Pearl has been carrying the biggest secret in the entire show for thousands of years. She literally cannot speak about it. Every time she tries to tell Steven the truth about Pink Diamond, her hands automatically cover her mouth. She's been programmed to stay silent. Here's what makes this so brutal. Pearl didn't choose this burden. Pink Diamond gave her one final order as her superior: never speak about faking her own death. And because Pearl was made for Pink Diamond, she has to obey. She physically cannot disobey this command, even though it's been torturing her for millennia. Think about how messed up that is. Pearl watched Steven struggle with questions about his mother's past, saw him blame himself for Pink Diamond's supposed death, and she couldn't say a single word to help him. She had to watch everyone she cared about live with this lie while being completely powerless to tell the truth. The episode shows us different versions of Pearl trapped in her own memories, some organizing items obsessively while others crying about losing Rose, another one standing in a battlefield full of shattered gems gems. These aren't just memories, they're trauma responses. Pearl has compartmentalized her pain so much that she's literally split into different versions of herself. When Steven finally sees the truth, that Rose was Pink Diamond and Pearl helped fake the shattering, you realize how much Pearl has sacrificed. She gave up her identity, her voice, and her freedom for someone who then abandoned her by becoming Steven's mom. The worst part is Pink Diamond's manipulation. She frames the plan as them both being free, but then immediately chains Pearl with an order she can never break. Pink gets to start fresh as Rose Quartz, but Pearl is stuck carrying this secret forever. Pearl's devotion to Pink Diamond is both beautiful and tragic. She was willing to help stage a fake murder, fight a war, and live with guilt for thousands of years because she loved her. But that love is built on a power dynamic where Pearl literally had no choice but to obey. What kills me is how Pearl says, "I wanted to tell you for so long." When Steven finally learns the truth, you can hear years of frustration and pain in that line. She's been desperate to share this burden, but couldn't because of programming she never chose. This episode reveals that Pearl's entire personality stemmed from this trauma. She's been holding herself together by force of will while carrying a secret that could have destroyed everything she cared about. The show doesn't let Pearl off easy either. Even after the truth comes out, she still has to deal with the consequences. Garnet unfuses, relationships fall apart, and Pearl has to rebuild trust with people who feel betrayed by the lie she was forced to keep. Pearl's tragedy is that she was the most loyal person in the show, and that loyalty was used against her. She didn't get a choice in any of this, not in serving Pink Diamond, not in keeping the secret, not in losing the person she loved most. A single pale rose shows how abuse can be disguised as love, how trauma can reshape your entire identity, and how some wounds never fully heal. Pearl spent thousands of years as a prisoner of her own devotion, and that's heartbreaking in a way that hits way too close to home. Pearl was trapped in silence by a love that controlled her every word, but Connie was shattered by the realization that love alone isn't enough to save someone who's already falling apart. One of the most heartbreaking moments for Connie reveals just how devastating it can be to watch someone you love fall apart. Growing pain starts with Steven having a complete physical breakdown. His body keeps swelling up randomly, he's glowing pink, and he can't control any of it. Connie immediately knows something is seriously wrong, and what does any good friend would do? She gets him medical help. But here's what gets brutal for Connie. She even takes Steven to see her mom, Dr. Maheswaran, thinking they can figure out what's happening medically. What they discover absolutely destroys her. The doctor shows Steven's x-rays and they're horrifying. His skeleton is covered in fractures, evidence of countless injuries that somehow healed instantly. Dr. Maheswaran explains that Steven's body has been through so much trauma that his stress response is completely broken. Then Steven starts listing his childhood experiences, and Connie has to sit there listening to him casually mention almost dying over and over again. He talks about being attacked by monsters, nearly drowning, watching Pearl die, being imprisoned on spaceships, and he calls it just the early stuff. The worst part for Connie is realizing she had no idea how much pain Steven was carrying. She's been his best friend for years, but she never understood the full scope of what he'd been through. When Dr. Maheswaran asks if Steven had been recent stressful experiences, everything explodes. Steven starts swelling out of control, breaking the ceiling and shattering windows. Connie watches helplessly as the person she cares about most completely loses control of his own body. The crushing moment comes when Steven realizes that Connie's presence is making him worse. He screams, "I can't be around you right now." And Connie has to leave the room. The person she wants to help most in the world literally cannot be near her because she's adding to his stress. This hits Connie so hard because she's always been Steven's support system. She's the one who helped him train, who went on missions with him, who believed in him when he doubted himself. But now, when he needs help the most, she's part of the problem. What makes this Connie's saddest moment is the helplessness. She can see Steven falling apart. She understands that he's been damaged by years of trauma, but there's nothing she can do to fix it. Love isn't enough to heal someone who's been through that much pain. The episode shows how hard it is to care about someone with serious mental health struggles. Connie desperately wants to help Steven, but she has to accept that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and give someone space. When she leaves the hospital room, Connie tells Steven, "I'll be here when you're ready." That line breaks your heart because it shows how much she loves him and how powerless she feels. She can't force him to get to feel better. She can't take away his pain, and she can't even be near him right now. This moment is devastating for Connie because it forces her to confront the reality of loving someone who's deeply hurting. She thought their friendship could handle anything, but trauma this severe requires professional help and time. Things that go way beyond what any teenager can provide. The episode doesn't give easy answers either. Connie has to learn that caring about someone doesn't mean you can save them. And sometimes the most supportive thing you can do is admit you're not equipped to handle their pain alone. Connie had to face the unbearable truth that love can't always fix the people you care about, while Greg was left to silently carry the guilt of being loved by someone whose heart was already claimed by another. Greg. Now, let's talk about Greg's most heartbreaking moment. And honestly, it shows how complicated grief can be when multiple people loved the same person. Mr. Greg is Steven Universe's musical episode, but don't let the songs fool you. This episode gets dark fast. Greg suddenly has millions of dollars and decides to take Steven and Pearl on a fancy trip to Empire City. What seems like a fun vacation quickly becomes an emotional nightmare. The whole trip starts falling apart because of the tension between Greg and Pearl. They've been avoiding each other for years because of Rose, and being stuck together in a hotel penthouse makes everything worse. Then comes the devastating moment. Greg and Steven are sleeping when Pearl thinks she's alone and starts singing "It's Over, Isn't It?" This song absolutely destroys you because Pearl pours out all her pain about losing Rose to Greg. She sings about how she was fine with other men in Rose's life, but Greg was different because Rose actually chose him. What makes this Greg's saddest moment is that he wakes up and hears the whole thing. He has to listen to Pearl sing about how much she's suffering because Rose fell in love with him instead of staying with her. Greg realized that his happiness with Rose came at the cost of Pearl's heartbreak. The lyrics hit him like a punch to the gut. Pearl sings, "You won and she chose you, and she loved you and she's gone." And Greg has to process what his greatest joy was, Pearl's greatest loss. Imagine hearing someone you care about describe your love story as their personal tragedy. After the song ends, Greg just gives up. He says nothing's gonna fix this, is it? And walks away. He tells Pearl, "I'm sorry you had to be around me." Like his very existence is causing her pain. The next scene shows Greg alone at the hotel bar, sadly eating cherries and looking completely defeated. This guy just became a millionaire and should be celebrating, but instead he's drowning in guilt and loneliness. He's realizing that his relationship with Rose created permanent damage that money can't fix. The cherry eating scene is particularly devastating because it's so mundane. Greg is just quietly existing in his sadness, mechanically eating fruit while processing years of suppressed guilt. It's the kind of depression that feels empty rather than explosive. What's really brutal is that Greg genuinely cares about Pearl's feelings. He's not angry or defensive about her pain. He's genuinely sorry that loving Rose hurt someone else so much. Most people would get mad if someone made them feel guilty for falling in love, but Greg just accepts the blame. This moment shows how isolating grief can be, especially when you're grieving the same person as someone who resents you. Greg has been carrying this guilt for years, knowing that his happiness came at Pearl's expense. He can't even properly mourn Rose because he feels like he doesn't deserve to be sad when Pearl lost more. The episode also reveals how Greg has been dealing with this alone. The Gems never really accepted him as part of their family, so he's been processing Rose's death without any support system. He's been the outsider looking in, watching everyone else grieve together while he suffers in silence. What makes it worse is that Greg probably replays moment with Rose differently now. Every happy moment is tainted by the knowledge that Pearl was suffering somewhere else. Every kiss, every laugh, every intimate moment carries the weight of someone else's heartbreak. Greg's sadness in this episode is quiet and resigned rather than dramatic. He doesn't scream or fight, he just accepts that he's the problem and tries to remove himself from the situation. That kind of internalized guilt and loneliness hits different than other characters' more obvious breakdowns. The episode does end with Greg and Pearl finally bonding over their shared love for Rose, which is beautiful. But that moment of Greg sitting alone, realizing how much pain his love caused, is absolutely heartbreaking and shows the complicated reality of loving someone who was loved by others too. And finally, if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.